pornography is filmed prostitution. And in my report, I demonstrated that prostitution is a system of exploitation and violence against women and girls. It is very gendered. It predominantly affects females, and it is perpetrated by males. Pornography operates in the same way. It has the same modus operandi, the same perpetrators of violence, the same exploitation, the same consequences in terms of all forms of violence inflicted on women and girls, in terms of being exploited by pimps. Being a victim is not something undignified, on the contrary. Being victim is a legal term that means you have been subjected to gross violations of human rights, and you are entitled to assistance, protection, and reparations. So this is why I say they are victims, that we have an obligation, and states have an obligation to assist them.
So, Madame Mrs. Alsalem, welcome in Strasbourg.
Thank you.
We are very pleased to welcome you here at the European Center for Law and Justice in Strasbourg. It's a great and a real pleasure and honor to have you with us. You are the current UN Special Rapporteur on violence against women and girls since 2021.
Correct.
You are from Jordan, and you are most often traveling, often in Geneva at the United Nations. You have a mandate given by the Human Rights Council, which is a body of states in charge of human rights based in Geneva, depending on the United Nations. So you are part of the UN human rights system.
Yes.
And you are the UN expert for violence against women and girls. So thank you very much. It's a very important topic. Currently, it's also an important topic for our organization. You have published recently reports on various issues, including the matter of prostitution. You're also working on pornography, so issues of dignity, human trafficking against women especially. So we would like first to give you a possibility to explain to the people what is this mandate, what is the purpose, and more importantly, why do you choose to address so difficult questions as pornography and prostitution?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. This is my first time in Strasbourg, which I regret. I should have come a long time ago, because of course the Council of Europe, and in particular, but not only, the body that monitors the implementation of the Istanbul Convention, is a very important partner. Of course, also I follow very much what the European Court of Human Rights says, but also the Assembly, the Parliamentary Assembly, the debates and the policies. So really a pleasure to be here. The Human Rights Council of the United Nations is like the kitchen where human rights policy gets cooked. And it was preceded by the Human Rights Commission, which is the one actually that created the mandate. My mandate is very old. Last year we celebrated 30 years of the mandate. It's actually one of the oldest special procedures that exist. And I'm not a staff, actually, of the United Nations. A lot of people misunderstand that. They think that I'm an official that is paid a salary, that reports to our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres of the United Nations. But that is not the case. I'm an independent expert, so I do this actually for free. I'm appointed by the Council by virtue of my expertise in order to actually work on issues of preventing violence against women and girls. The mandate for perhaps the longest time was violence against women. And I believe 2 years ago, the mandate was expanded to include also violence against girls. And that is something I requested, because we always speak about a continuum of violence, right? That violence against women, particularly structural violence, sexism, misogyny, harmful social norms, they don't start affecting females when they become adults.
Yes.
They often start sometimes from birth, sometimes even before birth and into adulthood. So I have a very big portfolio, which is to work with all stakeholders, but particularly states, in order to, prevent violence, which, as you know, has reached epidemic levels. This is a fact. This has been acknowledged. Of course, it's been also exacerbated by the many crises we've seen, especially in the last, let's say, decade or so. We've seen an exacerbation of humanitarian crisis. You add to that climate change. You add to that austerity measures and economic crises, and how states are also, let's say, reducing budgets and attentions dedicated to those to vulnerable groups, and I would put also women and victims of violence in general into that. So the needs are becoming more, but the resources, let's say, are becoming less. So I do my work through various ways. I write thematic reports. You referred to one of them. We're going to speak about it now. I also write letters to governments, but also non-state actors, businesses, military groups, on behalf of victims that have suffered violence, and I remind these stakeholders of their human rights obligations. These letters become public, they are published, and also if there is a response that we receive, the response is published. So anyone anywhere in the world can see the feedback we got and the letters we wrote. And then, of course, we engage also on policies, whether it's draft legislative reforms or it's also public policies, let's say, that affect women and girls. And so, and finally, we do also country visits. I do 2 country visits a year where I look comprehensively at the situation of women and girls and the risk of violence for them, and also what the governments are putting in place in order to address their needs in terms of assistance and protection. So, given that we as mandate holders have really the liberty to decide how to exercise our mandate, I have always wanted to address complex, timely issues on which I see a lot of discussions, on which I see a lot of governments grappling with these issues, so that I can do a report that can contribute to this conversation and that can also demonstrate the human rights consequences for women and girls and unpack the relationship between an issue and exposure to violence for women and girls. And given that the issue of prostitution and pornography has been very topical, there's a lot of discussion about what's the best way to approach prostitution and pornography, the harms of prostitution and pornography, not just for the women and girls that are victims, I would say children in general, but I'm going to speak about girls since it's my mandate, but also society as a whole. Now, you may ask me, why am I speaking about prostitution and pornography together? That's because in my report, I address them together. Because in fact, pornography is filmed prostitution. And in my report, I demonstrated that prostitution is a system of exploitation and violence against women and girls. It is very gendered. It predominantly affects females, and it is perpetrated by males. And pornography operates in the same way. It has the same modus operandi, the same perpetrators of violence, the same exploitation, the same consequences in terms of all forms of violence inflicted on women and girls, in terms of being exploited by pimps, in terms of also having immense harmful impact on all society, including, I would say, men and boys, but including also younger girls and harmful to gender equality overall in society, because we cannot ever pretend that we will achieve a society where there is equality between men and women if we normalize that men can buy women's bodies or children, that we commodify women and girls, that everything can be bought and sold. Also because it hypersexualizes now the young generation, particularly girls, and it is giving them the message that the best environment for them to thrive is an environment where they can be sexualized. That this is really the best avenue for them to prosper, to make money, to be appreciated, is if they are, if they sell sexual services, if they sell their bodies. And it goes without saying that this is incredibly dangerous, very harmful, and goes against countries' human rights obligations and businesses' human rights obligation towards women and girls. This is why I think it's very important to remember that, because, you know, sometimes I'm asked, oh, you shouldn't be so moralistic. It's not a discussion about morals. It's a discussion about human rights.
How do you explain that, Western society is full of pornography? Pornography is everywhere. There is a huge use of pornography. And in the meantime, we hear a lot about feminism. And how do you explain that we tolerate so easily pornography in the society? It's so difficult to fight against it, even to be conscious of the problem.
Yes. I wouldn't say it's restricted to Western societies. I think normalizing consuming pornography has become an issue that is an epidemic as well, on global proportions. Of course, it varies the exposure a little bit from country to country, depending also on their laws. There are countries, for example, that outlaw it officially, completely, ban it completely, and others who just also allow it completely. The issue is that I think a lot of people would like to. I think a lot of people don't understand actually how violent the world of pornography has become. Of course, the consumers know this, but I still believe that the majority of well-meaning people in society may not understand that the violence it incites, the grotesque, the degrading treatment is actually the majority of what we see. They also, I think, believe wrongly that there are safeguards in place, especially age verification, for example. One would expect that there would be age verification. I think until recently, many people may have believed that there are also ways of monitoring who is depicted in these videos. Is it victims of trafficking, for example? Is it women that have been beaten and really coerced into the situation or not? And then also, they are bombarded by this narrative that glamorizes pornography, in a sense that we are now hearing more and more this discourse that it's empowering. There are many women and girls that are consenting to this. We forget the fact that actually children are children and consent is irrelevant, right? But you have also that discourse happening, and that tries to attract more girls in particular into this business, into the system of exploitation by giving a lot of visibility to the economic side of it, the money that you can make out of it. And then you also have people, of course, and governments that play the card of freedom of speech and thought. And of course, freedom of belief and thought and expression and is very important and should be safeguarded. But already in international law, including in European law, you have limitations on free speech, which is written, enshrined in the law, that you can have it, but it has a limit, which is not to incite violence, not to incite hatred. But somehow we don't think about the link between pornography and physical violence, because often pornography and the consumption of violence, pornography leads to violence in real life. We know that from studying consumers of pornography, the men and how their attitude changes to the women in their lives, to their children, but also to wider society, to sex, to normalizing violent sexual intercourse. But somehow that doesn't feed back into the policy making as being a red flag.
Is it a matter of time, or is it just they don't see it? Are they in the process of seeing? Because we see an increase of violence between the youth, of rape from teenagers. So we see the increasing violence within society, sexual violence.
Yes.
But we don't always make the connection with pornography.
Yes.
And moreover, what we can really see is that even if everybody is almost conscious of some issues, especially when you have children, it seems that the society is even not capable of or willing to do anything. I mean, politicians sometimes speak about regulating pornography, having a better system of age verification, but they don't do anything. So are we even able to do something against it, or are we just not able to do it?
Yes.
Is it a matter of techniques, or is it a matter of political will?
Yeah. So I think there's now more awareness, because it has also now permeated everything in society. It has come into our very homes.
Yes.
And with the explosion of social media and social media access by also the young generation, and the ease with which the adolescent and young population can access internet content, and we are now seeing much more clearly the horrendous negative consequences. I think there's been an aha moment for a lot of people in society, because as you rightly mentioned, they are starting to realize this link between exposure to pornography and violence. We are seeing in some countries sexual crimes being perpetrated more by a younger and younger population, including very serious things like gang rape. Of course, we now hear a lot more about strangulation. So I think there is more awareness. I also think there is more awareness now about the modus operandi and the business models of digital platforms, and how they also host pornography and pornographic materials. I think some of us, the older generation, may have not realized that a lot of the social media apps are gateways to pornography, host pornographic content. You know, the TikTok, the Instagram, the X. Because in our generation, you would go, you know, it was like, it had a specific format, you know, it would be a movie, it would be in a specific place, it would be a site dedicated for that. Now it's being inserted everywhere. And now you have people understand more things that are sort of self-service, right? Like Pornhub, OnlyFans, where you, with Pornhub, you upload content and you get monetized for it. So I think the public is catching up. But as you rightly said, it's important that politicians also quickly catch up, because they don't have the luxury to wait.
Yes,
because
yes.
the impact is so immense and so all-encompassing that, and of course, technology also advances. You know, the AI, the deep fakes, that we don't have the luxury to wait.
You mentioned some countries that forbid.
Yes.
Which countries forbid? Are they effective in really forbidding?
Yeah, that's something I would need to look more in detail on. Of course, I guess everything forbidden finds a black market. Is, however, the ban working? I imagine to an extent, yes. I mean, just by common sense, but I can't really.
I mean,
say too much
if we
about it.
see some control from the state regulation on social media,
Yeah.
I mean, if you speak badly, if you have racist statements online, for example,
Yes.
I mean, you are quite quickly identified.
Yes.
Even if you speak against COVID, sometimes you are quickly identified by the algorithm. So I don't see how we can so easily control some kinds of expressions.
Absolutely.
While having no control at all.
Absolutely.
On pornography.
Yes.
I mean, we do have the system to control, at least to avoid a number of things that are extremely violent or involve children.
Yes.
And so for me, it's really a mystery. How do we let it do?
Yes.
I mean, is it a matter of money as well? Is it a matter of corruption? Because, of course, all those pornography websites, they have a lot of clients, they have a lot of bank references of clients.
Yes.
So they know a lot about the persons. So, I mean, what is the side of corruption? We have been dealing with this system, with this industry. We have seen how much close this industry is to mafia. So we know that it's also dangerous to deal or to try to look how it works financially. So it's really a matter for the police. It's a matter for the tax police to look in also. So what the state is doing also to address all the violations of the law in terms of social protection of the woman, non-declaration of incomes, because we see the companies of pornography opening one day in one country, closing, moving to Romania, then going to Bulgaria.
Yeah.
And so do we have are we able to have an answer in terms of acting also on the finance aspect, because they need banks?
Yes.
And is there any transnational or international cooperation to address those companies?
Yeah. So you remember how I said that pornography is film prostitution and shares a lot of the modus operandi with physical prostitution. And we see this very clearly in terms of the huge web of people, organizations, and states that benefit from the exploitation of women, including in pornography. Countries that host, let's say, the headquarters of these big sites make an enormous amount of money. Okay. And every other sort of business that is related, if we think about tourism, if we think about banking, if we think, so really a lot of business thrives around the business of prostitution, including criminal activities. So as I've said in my report, criminal activities like trafficking, money laundering, drug trafficking, all this thrives around the issue of physical and online prostitution. I also think that just as pornography shares with physical prostitution the harms, it also shares the key to solutions. What do I mean by that? As I said in the report, I think the best policy model we have, it's tried and tested to deal with the harms of prostitution, is the Nordic model. And we have to then also think how to apply the Nordic model to online prostitution, which is pornography. I don't think actually countries that have the Nordic model even think about it in this way, but I would encourage them to do that, which is to also think of the consumer of pornography as a buyer of sexual acts.
Yeah.
So if we think of him
Yeah.
as a buyer of sexual acts, that means he has to be criminalized. We have to address the demand. We have to cut the demand. We have to make it more difficult to just get online and we have to increase awareness about the fact that they are part of this supply chain, that they are therefore participating actively, whether they like it or not, in the violence and exploitation of women and children that are depicted in pornography. So that has to happen. And, there's very interesting things that we can learn from what happened to Pornhub, for example, in the US. As you know, Pornhub, there's been, several very important litigation cases by victims, particularly victims of trafficking. They have even went to exactly, examine this link between banking intermediaries. I forget which card, it was, whether it was MasterCard or...
Yes, MasterCard,
But really also, trying to sever that link and also shaming and naming that you as a bank are also, and or a banking system are knowingly taking advantage and benefiting. And I think these court cases were damaging, necessary but damaging. Of course, not everyone has neither the perseverance nor, of course, the ability to protect victims that come forward or the money to launch yourself into such expensive litigation cases. But with regards to Pornhub, I think they've worked. It has led also to changes in legislation. For example, if I remember correctly, a number of states in the US have, imposed on Pornhub the duty to have age verification. And I think, and this is indicative of how profitable this is, Pornhub chose to actually retreat from those states that enforced age verification. So I think there are lessons that we can learn from that. But what I've also said to the political groups in the European Parliament, I think states need to also move towards binding regulations, right, and enforcements of regulations actually. So right now, what we have in place depends too much still on getting the goodwill of these platform providers, enticing them to play nice, encouraging them to do this or that. Yes, you can keep the dialogue ongoing, and it's important, of course, to dialogue with all businesses, and we do this with all businesses, including those that are committing other kinds of violations in other fields. But it can't be the only model. You will never get anywhere.
What you mentioned in the US against Pornhub, has been done by association, which is very important. Unfortunately, it's not the state. The government didn't really act. So what is needed in front of pornography is really a decision from governments to act. And also from the banks. Because one of the differences between prostitution and online prostitution, pornography, that online you need a credit card. Which means in the middle between you and the service, you have a bank, which takes a commission. So when you pay for something that is clearly illegal, implies traffic, implies young persons and so forth, the bank takes a commission on a crime. So
exactly.
Yes, the bank gets money from a crime, and often, not often, always, the banks knows exactly what is the activity of the client.
Yes.
So they know what they do. So I can say that for France, I know the name of 2 or 3 big French banks
Yes.
that do have those activities.
Yes.
And do something like, chat prostitution. So they know that they get, commissions from prostitution online, and so forth. So my question is, within your mandate at the UN, do you get support from group of states from everywhere, or is it quite rare? Would you say that you are mainly supported by, we could imagine, the so-called Nordic states, or are you more supported by the Muslim states or the Western states? Which states are conscient of this issue?
So look, I was pleasantly surprised that when I presented my report in June 2024 in front of the members of the Council, the report was very well received by the majority of states that intervened. This is on record. Anyone can actually go and check that out. And you will see that there was positive feedback from countries across regions.
Good.
Of course, there were countries that weren't happy, also because I put out the term pimping state, as I said, to really make the point that there are states that are very consciously benefiting from the exploitation of women. And by the way, that term I heard from a victim of prostitution.
Okay.
So she was speaking with so much anger, actually, about how states are really doing this with purpose and without caring. And so to answer your question, I think there were countries really from all over the regions that welcomed the report. I remember one delegate telling me that for them it felt like a breath of fresh air, because it really tried to look at this in an objective, victim-centered, human-centered manner, irrespective of the noise and the posturing and the political sort of views that are being pushed around, which, as you know, also try to present prostitution as dignified work that should be legalized, that should be normalized, that should be called sex work. I think they were surprised that a special rapporteur was willing to be led to, through the inquiry, to reach different conclusions. They didn't necessarily expect that. I didn't necessarily expect that, because I had not really had a very firm position on prostitution in that way until I started this report. I had not really thought about the exploitation and abuse consequences. And in fact, you will see that in a number of reports preceding this report, yes, I had used the term sex work, regrettably, because I had never thought about it, the aspects of prostitution as being exploitation. But that, I think, I'm saying this because I think it also strengthens the fact, the point I'm trying to make, that I came to this report and its conclusions because I was overwhelmed by the evidence, but that I had no sort of specific agenda or preconceived ideas on the issue.
How do you explain that there is big pressure to legalize prostitution and pornography?
Yeah.
And where does it come from?
Yeah, I think you probably would know more about this than me. I just know that there's a big push by certain groups, lobby groups, businesses. As I said, those who profit in order to try to make it easier to normalize this. So therefore, selling a model or a discourse that might sound actually logical on the
paper.
Yeah, on paper and on the surface. Particularly, if you say, well, if you argue or if you claim that most women consent to this, most women want to do this is bodily autonomy, this is their freedom to decide, this results in lowering exposure to violence, it will lead them on a road to work legally and therefore get a salary and therefore be covered by Social Security and therefore have access to health service. So by legalizing the sale and the purchase and therefore the pimping, you actually reduce harm. And wouldn't we all want that? So as I said, if you listen to the sound bites, you might say, well, yeah, I mean, we all want the best for the victims and to reduce harm. The issue, though, as I argued in my report very convincingly, I think, is that the data doesn't show this at all. In fact, if you look at the data, it proves that none of these declared objectives are achieved. They sound nice, but the reality is very different. And if we look at countries that have legalized all aspects of prostitution, particularly that is not what has happened. In fact, quite the contrary has happened. Now, where I and the group pushing for the legalization of everything agree, because believe it or not, there's a few things we agree on, is that the victims, the prostituted women, should not be punished for being in prostitution. That they should not be deported, they should not be imprisoned, they should not be fined, they shouldn't have a criminal record, and those that have a criminal record, that should be removed. I go a step further and I say, not only should they not be criminalized, but they should be treated as victims of gross human rights violation. And by being treated as victims, I'm not belittling them or saying they are passive or persons who were subjected to violence, because being a victim is not something undignified. On the contrary, being victim is a legal term that means you have been subjected to gross violations of human rights, and you are entitled to assistance, protection, and reparations. So this is why I say they are victims, that we have an obligation, and states have an obligation to assist them and to ensure non-repetition, but also to offer them reparations. That's I think the main issue, and I feel that the more we center victims and victims' voices in any policy-making discussion, the more states and parliamentarians and legislators give room to victims to speak, the better the policies will be. The problem right now is that in many policy-making platforms, there are very selected voices that are allowed to speak. And so it doesn't bring in the diversity of voices, particularly the victims. So those representing, I hate to say, but they could be representing pimping pimps, they could be representing businesses that get a lot of interest.
And money, yeah.
Yeah, and money. They have the access, right, to these policymakers. So then if you don't make a deliberate effort to open the space to all voices, particularly those that find it difficult to access policy-making places, including frontline organizations that work with victims, women's organizations, grassroots organizations that work with victims of sexual exploitation and trafficking and prostitution, you will always get this one-sided view that everything is fine, that where's the problem? The women want this. Of course, if you shut the door and you only let some people in, you're gonna live in your own echo chamber. And you will say, but we have
so
no
you mean
problem.
you would only let those who have a direct interest in the business?
Yes.
Because of course, how much money does it generate?
Right, a lot. I mean,
So-
in my report, I mentioned about Switzerland. I can't recall but it's, I mean, we're speaking.
So it's companies, it's professional persons. So
Yes.
they have the money to have consultants, to have lobbyists,
Absolutely.
to do campaigns, to create NGOs,
Yes.
To hire people.
Yes, ambassadors.
Ambassadors to
Yes.
go to the Council of Europe, to go to the
Yeah.
UN, and of course the poor victim from Africa who is trafficked in Europe. She doesn't have access to the Council of Europe
yes.
to speak about her situation.
I would say all marginalized, vulnerable women that are the principal source or affected group for prostitution don't have that access. So, as you rightly said, it's often migrant and refugee women or women actually fleeing conflict, women fleeing poverty.
Yeah.
But also it's women, it can be also women from poorer backgrounds, from broken homes, women and girls that have sadly already experienced sexual abuse by family members, may have already been also, let's say, prostituted even by an intimate partner. You know, there's the grooming by boyfriends, right? So that can happen also, let's say, to white girls, you know, from the country. But the majority, let's say, is obviously what you said.
So we have seen in the last months a real offensive to obtain legal text recommending legalization of prostitution.
Yes.
As European Parliament in Brussels, a motion for resolution that at the end was rejected.
Yes.
Then we saw here in Strasbourg at the Assembly of the Council of Europe as well a motion for resolution that pushed for liberalization of prostitution. And it was at the end, thank God, rejected.
Yes.
A case brought before the European Court of Human Rights, and at the end the court also rejected this strategic litigation. But what we can see is that at every level, before many institutions, there is a coordinated effort to push for recognition of a human right to sex work, human rights to prostitution, through the human rights system. So obviously we have to be clear, there is such effort to push.
Yes.
What do you see as the good legal instruments to be opposed? Which are the norms in terms of human rights, in terms of international law, that can be strong support for national and international policies against human sexual trafficking? Yeah,
so I think all these motions were fortunately defeated because, as we said, there are many more politicians and parliamentarians, but also lawyers and judges that are becoming aware of this. I precisely wanted through this report to show that there are grave human rights consequences. And where grave human rights consequences happen, consent is invalid. Consent cannot be raised as a defense. Yeah. We would never go to a victim of slavery, somebody who's been enslaved, right? Even if, let's say, they were enslaved at 6 years old, even if they started developing a Stockholm syndrome and love their master, so to speak, and wants to stay, would we ever say, you consented to this? We would not, right? My purpose was to show, to make it clear that prostitution results in grave human rights consequences, particularly for the victim, economic violence, physical violence, psychological violence. I've listed them in detail. And I think there has to be more awareness of that it results in multiple, long-lasting, devastating human rights consequences. And therefore, by framing the consequences as harmful and as crimes against humanity, they can rise in many instances to being inhuman, degrading treatment. They can even be torture. They can amount to forced enslavement, you know. So again, involving they can or not involve trafficking. These are very big crimes, right?
Yes.
This is not a walk through the park. This is not a,
Yeah.
you know, you hurt my toe kind of thing. These are very serious realities that these women are subjected to day in, day out, and that we just are invisible in society. Actually, we live in parallel. Like there are so many victims of prostitution that probably are here in our, you know, around us. We would never see them. We would never hear from them. We would never come into contact with them, right? Like we would never know what their experience is. So it's important then to show states that these are very serious human rights violations, and they go against your obligations as states, and you have a duty to therefore prevent them, to end them, but also to address the needs of the victims and to provide reparations for them. So it takes the conversation out from sort of prostitution being presented as a harmless business that allows people to find a way to make ends meet, to something that is actually an emergency that should be treated as a human rights emergency, and that requires it to be prioritized. So it shifts that conversation, and it also puts the obligation on states to, you know how states have this obligation to address harmful social norms that lead to inequality and discrimination of women. So if, you know, if normalizing the purchase and sale of women leads to consolidating these harmful stereotypes, leads to increased sexism, misogyny, violence against women, then states have a duty to also campaign against the sale and buying of women. That's why the Nordic model has this as a fifth component, you know, in the program. The Nordic model has different components of what you need to do. And one of them is campaigns, education campaigns, information campaigns, making it clear that it's harmful that you shouldn't buy women and children, and that you have responsibility and you need to be aware of it and you will be held responsible. So yeah.
So do you see support from NGOs, from large NGOs in this task?
I see support from a lot of NGOs across the world. I see overwhelming support from victims who, many of them said that they were so touched and so happy to see a report like this coming out from a UN, let's say, organism or expert even, and that listened to them, that centered their voices. Are there NGOs and individuals in prostitution that are against it? Yes.
What about the religions? Do you have support from religious groups or organizations of Islamic countries or Catholic Church?
I think there's support across the board from secular and faith-based organizations. Again, you know, I try to make this very clear that I'm not addressing this from a morality point of view. This is not my mandate, morality. I mean, nothing against it, you know, and nothing against it if there are organizations that are fighting for advancing morality. I mean, I'm not judging anyone, but I'm saying my mandate is human rights.
But do you have support from Islamic countries or at the UN or from Catholic countries? I mean, especially, do you see a special mindset or conscience of the issue? We could imagine that persons with a religious thinking of the human person would have a better commitment to fight human trafficking.
Look, I don't think the defining factor is religion, because in fact there are many countries that let's say claim claim to prioritize religion and faith, or whose legal systems are inspired or built on faith, that do something also very harmful when it comes to prostitution, which is they completely ban and criminalize everything. Mm-hmm. Which means also they end up criminalizing the victim. Woman, which means that in a way it also means that they're not doing enough, they don't care enough about helping the victim. Mm. And in fact, banning all aspects of prostitution, including the move to criminalize the victim itself, leads to the onus falling on the victim. Yeah. The buyer still gets away with it. Law enforcement is often involved in getting the buyer off the hook. I see. But it's the woman that will get deported, land in prison, be exploited or abused in prison. And so, claiming that you just pretend prostitution doesn't exist because your religion says it's not allowed, that's also not a good policy approach. Yes. It's actually very harmful. So you have these two opposing policies at the end of the spectrum, and both are very, very bad. Good. The complete legalization, but also the complete criminalization of everything. Yes, and the hypocrite approach. So, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. We wish you the best. Thank you. Also for your next reports. Thank you. We will follow very closely your work, and thank you again for your courage, because what you do, what you address is difficult, we know. So, but you are doing very good work for humanity, addressing those difficult questions. So, thank you very much, and merci beaucoup. Thank you.